All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. Unfortunately for the Reds, the results in Milwaukee were not unfamiliar to that team, but with this new team at this time in the season, what did stand out to you about losing 3 of 4 at American Family Field?
Well, the Reds played losing baseball in winnable games against some bad pitchers, and it was such an opportunity for the Reds against a Brewers team that's had their number. Specifically, when you look at the fact that this Brewers staff is as decimated as I've ever seen a pitching staff, but the Brewers played clean baseball and the Reds didn't, and now I'm concerned about the Reds.
There's that word again. Building off of last week's show, the sample size is a little bit larger, a little bit more diverse. Your level of concern is up after the series in Milwaukee?
Well, and I won't go through the whole roster now, but basically the whole roster, it's a little even more leaning towards that direction, individual by individual, than it was even a week ago. When you look at, Fraley continued to struggle. Now McLean's hamstrings tight. Guys who you thought were coming back from injuries right now, a little more uncertainty about when they're coming back. And I could go all the way down to Sam Maul. Like, almost every single piece of this roster is in a little more concerning of a spot than it was a week ago. And add that up, and it's a Reds team that's had a poor start.
And that is where we are. And that's where we start this edition of Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, a proud member of the Growler Podcast Network. On the show this week, Chaz, since you've started us on such an uplifting note so far for the Reds and all of Reds country, on the show this week, TJ Friedl owns it and has a question of his own post-game in Milwaukee. Also, Tito versus technology. We've all been there, right? And planes, trains, and automobiles, kind of, on the road with my partner, Charlie Goldsmith. I got questions. I haven't traveled with you before, so I've got questions.
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is a movie, right?
Right. And there's another part of the conversation that we'll get to at some point because you're not a movie guy, right?
Well, I like movies. I just haven't seen a lot of movies.
Just because that one's another old one. And that thus drives home the point that I continue to be confronted with in doing these conversations with you is I am old and you are not. All right, so the Reds are in Milwaukee. They start with all that. They dropped the first game of the series on Thursday, and then things continue to go downhill. And what I loved as I was keeping track of your coverage from Milwaukee, Charlie's Chalkboard. And you should all subscribe and get Charlie's Chalkboard and read Charlie's Chalkboard because the next dispatch from Milwaukee on Charlie's Chalkboard was entitled "A Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day for the Reds." And so this is one thing we could agree on, Chaz, right? We both know that was an award-winning children's book, right?
Also a movie. So here, look at me dropping a movie reference.
See, I never caught the flick, and so that's where we are. But in the book, and I had to go back and look. I borrowed some things from Google. Alexander, the main character, his horrible day starts with gum in his hair. Terry Francona has no hair, so his day wouldn't start the same way, but set the stage for this day at the ballpark where everything seemed to head south for the Reds before the game even started.
So it's funny, like, things are already not great. Like, you lose 1-0 the night before because Lodolo drops the ball at first base and you get shut out again. But hey, it's a long series, 4-game series. Let's turn it around on Friday. We get notified around 3 that when the Reds clubhouse is scheduled to open, it will not be opening due to illness, and Francona will address it. Then we show up in the dugout to talk to Francona, and it's Nick Krall. And he goes, people are sick. Francona's sick. We'll have enough guys to play tonight, but Francona will manage. And then 5 minutes later, Krall comes back out. Francona's going home. He's sick. Francona had a terrible case of what we believe to be food poisoning. And I understand between the hours of 3 and 5 was very hit or miss in the Reds clubhouse among these players. Like, it hit guys in various stages and to various degrees. And it was a scene that we'll never truly know how ugly things really got from a health perspective in the Reds clubhouse between them. About 4 or 5 guys ended up being unavailable that night, Terry Francona included. But then finally, all right, you got enough guys to play. And then McLean tests out his hamstring, and turns out his tight hamstring wasn't getting much better in pregame warmups. So at that point, literally, it's like, all right, let's make sure the Reds have a team tonight, because you had to be sure of that. And, you're already down your manager. I've covered the team for 5 years. It was truly one of the all-time most chaotic pre-games I've ever been a part of.
Chaotic, bizarre, and as you're kind of pulling back the curtain there and talking about what the clubhouse was like or what information was coming in and out of the clubhouse, there was a time years ago when my kids were young, and a bug like that, I don't know if it was food poisoning or a bug, hit the entire family, and it shut all 5 of us down for a solid 36 hours, and we can't also describe all the things we saw and heard and did within our house in that 36 hours, but my wife still to this day says that was the 36 hours, whenever it was, what year, that we will never speak of again. And you kinda get the sense that the Reds are going through this, and if they can just get on the field, maybe it gets better, but it didn't. I mean, they continued to have all these issues.
And again, let me stress one more time, some guys were in rough shape on
Yeah.
Friday. But the series as a whole, I mean, even so, some guys who were totally fine get fastballs right down the middle from a pitcher who makes $1 million a year, and they do nothing against it. And then the next day, they're facing another reliever, and he ends up, I think, going into the sixth. And the next day, they're facing a guy who's like a AAA reliever, and he has the start of his life. There were so many hittable pitches. Like I was talking about earlier, pretty much every hitter is basically in a more concerning spot. You saw that translate with the adjustments that aren't clicking. You're starting to see some frustration settle in. And it was just a rough week and a rough stretch. And you can look forward and talk about the impact about what this shows this red season might look like for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, a couple of nuggets from Francona. He described after the fact some of that illness as intestinal turmoil, quote, intestinal turmoil. And when you guys asked the next day how he was doing, when he was back, he said, I don't think I've been 100% since 1988. That's when things started to go downhill. So perspective.
I then asked what happened in 19 I then asked what happened in 1988, and he says, "I don't know."
And
That's what he said. I don't know.
that was the year after his season in Cincinnati. So it's been a long time. Anyway, all that to say, let's circle back now to some of the specifics. Um, when the season started, like everybody's season, you have question marks, and then you have projections, and you have things that you're hopeful for. And based off of last season, when you look at the Reds outfield and you look at Jake Fraley specifically, so many things were going on with Jake Fraley last time. He missed things, certainly with some family and personal things that certainly supersede everything that we talk about what he does or doesn't do on a baseball field. But last year, he did hit for some average. Power was down. What were the expectations and hopes for Fraley coming into this season, and where does that stand now after 3 series?
Well, the Reds did try to do what they could with their limited payroll to improve the outfield. They made an interesting trade for Gavin Lux. They signed Austin Hayes, but this team was built for Jake Fraley to hit against right-handed pitching. And like, yes, the power was down a lot last year, but even among like all the Reds, aside from maybe like Ellie and McLean, like Fraley was one of those guys who was like, you know what you're gonna get. He's never lost. Like, he'll always work tough at bats. Like, he one of the more steady players, even though the upside wasn't nearly there. But then what you're seeing now is a guy who's just not steady, and he's lost that like foundation. Not he's lost, but he's not showing that foundation of who he is, and it looks like a completely different version of Jake Fraley. You're seeing that in his at bats. You saw it in the field on Saturday. The most concerning play of the season was a routine ground ball to right field, gets under Fraley's mitt. He said, there was a few different things going on there in that play. We'll hear from Francona talking about Jake and his swing and why he's keeping Fraley in the lineup. And then we'll hear from Fraley talking about that play and how he responded to it.
Trying to stay through the ball. That's probably the easiest way I can say it, as opposed to kind of cutting it off and you'll see him hit balls like kind of down the first base line in their dugout. So, he's trying to go this way. You can see he's trying. It's just when the game starts and things start to speed up, it gets a little harder. It was nice yesterday off the lefty. He kind of used his hands and stayed back and hit that ball to right field. That was really good to see.
Is it hard for the offense not to affect the defense sometimes when you're struggling?
Is hard what?
For the offense to not affect the defense at some point.
You would like the defense to be better, because you got to help somehow. And he's actually played a really good right field. He whiffed on a grounder yesterday. I don't think that was because of his batting. He just missed it.
I by no means am I taking anything. I mean, for the most part, I've played, other than that play yesterday, I feel like I played a tremendous defense. And I take a lot of pride on it. So I take full responsibility for positivity. At the same time, there's things that we can't control out there. It is a very tough outfield. There's a lot of divots. So charging out on the ball, I feel like I had good form and everything that we've been working on. I work on ground balls every day with CC. It just happened to take a sharp left turn on me on the divot. And I mean, there's not much I can do about it. But again, it's my responsibility to make a play in a big situation like that. And unfortunately, I didn't.
There's Fraley taking accountability. There's Fraley, though. You can also hear in his voice and in Francona's voice. I mean, this is just a grind. And I've talked to Jake about this too. Like, this stretch has just been a grind for him. It's not the Fraley that we're used to seeing. And one more moment I wanted to bring up was on Saturday after the ball got by him in right field. He tried to lay down a bunt. And yeah, he was facing a lefty. And those are historically tough matchups for him. It reminded me of Will Myers laying down a bunt in the middle of April in 2023 when Myers was grinding. I'm not drawing this comparison. Completely different players. However, when Myers laid down that bunt, that was kind of an alarm bell that some people in the Reds organization took it as, and he really is grinding here, and it kind of led to a reassessment of Myers. Again, what's Fraley's long-term role? Will it change? Will he fall more into Jacob Hurtubise' role? When Austin Hayes comes back, before Hayes comes back, do they call Benson up? Like, we won't go through all those roster decisions and machinations here, but the missed play on defense, the bunt, the missed pitches down the middle, that all makes, I mean, you can't avoid the conversation that this just isn't who Jake Fraley had been, the guy we're seeing right now.
Staying in the outfield and also staying with the accountability theme, let's get to TJ Friedl, who had clearly his best game of the season in the Reds win in Milwaukee. But as you watched that game and then spoke with him after about his performance, take us inside the clubhouse on how that all played out, with not only his thoughts on finally having that game that he's been searching for this season and having those swings that he's been searching for this season, but also where that conversation went with him post-game.
Friedl is, in a lot of ways, like the heartbeat of the team. And sure, that's a bit of a cliche, but you saw it on Saturday when Friedl's on base. And you see every day in the clubhouse just the presence. He's already one of the longest tenured Reds. He's a guy that people respond to. And he had this awesome 4-hit game the other day on Saturday. And we're asking about the hits, about the offense finally waking up. We interview him for 3 minutes. And at the end, he goes, wait, no questions about me running with one out. And earlier in the game, Friedl had thought there were 2 outs. He takes off on kind of a line drive fly ball. It was coming off a pitching change, so he probably just lost track of the outs, which obviously can't happen. And he gets doubled up at first. And I'd honestly forgotten about it. I mean, he had 4 hits. He had a heck of a game. The Reds won. The play didn't cost them. But Friedl was talking about that. He went on. That play is inexcusable. I talked to Francona about it right away. I mean, that's table setter.
Friedl talked to Francona about it, right? In game.
Friedl talked to in game, exactly. That's table setter for the lineup. That's also table setter for a team that needs a spark, that needs some more confidence, that needs to find itself. Candelario said about Friedl, when he's on base, we're a different team. And there's a lot that Friedl does to make the Reds a different team. He didn't get to do that kind of stuff last year. He couldn't be the same grinder because, he was hurt, and he gets to be himself now. I talked to him about how he really gets to feel being himself at the plate this season. Were you trying to pull for more power last year because you weren't running as fast as you normally run?
No, that was just kind of like coincidental, I guess. There was nothing about my approach or stance or anything that was like trying to lift the ball more. Like, when I didn't have the speed that I always have, or when I got moved to the 4-hole or 5-hole towards the end of the year, like, I never looked at that. It was like, okay, like, let me hit 4 power, because that's not how I am. Like, If I pull the ball, I'm pretty good at getting it in the air when I pull it, but that's never the 10 when I step in the box is to get the head out and pull the ball. Like, that's not who I am. But I am 5'10", 180 pounds. I need to get on base for the guys who are hitting behind me so they can hit me and, steal bases, give me some more positions, do the little thing.
In general, you hit the ball more the other way this year. Are you trying to? Is that a focus? Or
I'm not trying to. Like, I'm not trying to force anything. I'm just kind of taking the pitches and hitting them where they're pitched. I have seen more balls hit the other way, like through spring training and so far throughout the season, more balls up the middle, line drives up the middle. But my mindset is just try to take the ball where it's pitched and hit it that way. I'm not trying to force anything. I'm not trying to pull outside pitches or push balls out. Like, for me, it's just kind of taking my hits wherever the ball.
I mean, that's what the Reds need, right? It was fitting that the Reds scored, 11 runs on a day where Friedl did all that to a team. Yes, he hit a homer too, but like he's saying, he's not trying to do that. And again, on the field, off the field, Friedl really does set the tone for what the Reds are doing.
I like that a lot. And I certainly like, as a reporter, I like that type of reaction from a player. If there's something someone wants to say, and I always feel like there's a missed opportunity if we don't ask the question, and then you circle back and you go, either I didn't ask that or there was something. I love when there's something that a player wants to say, that he makes sure that he gets that out there and that he's comfortable enough with you and the rest of the beat guys and the guys in Milwaukee to go ahead and stop that down and say, hey, I want to tell you about what happened, and I want to tell you how I reacted to it. And I want to tell you the rest of that story. And so I think that's fantastic from Friedl. And yes, he is one of those kind of guys. And those things moving forward, if you're going to pull yourself out of what the Reds have already fallen into early in the season, you need a few more moments like that. Let's do a quick big picture injury, and let's talk about pitching. Injury reports now. We've seen this on the horizon for a while because we knew when the season started that Andrew Abbott was just behind, that he was ramping up. He was just down the timeline a little bit from where he wanted to be. What about the Andrew Abbott status right now, and then maybe the impact or the plan for him as he continues to progress if that goes well?
What's beautiful about baseball, and what I'm about to say isn't beautiful, but what's beautiful about baseball is managers every day tell you what they're really thinking about players. Carson Spires had a fantastic spring, and I'm a fan of Spires, and the Reds love him too. But Francona pulling Spires after 3 1/3 innings on Sunday. I mean, to me, that told you what you need to know about Spires versus Abbott. This is Abbott's spot. This has always been Abbott's spot. Francona's talked about him being one of the Reds' better pitchers. They took the patient approach to make sure they were getting the best version of him because of how confident they are in the upside that's in there. They don't just want him to be a guy who comes in and throws innings. So Francona's decision kind of paved the way. Abbott's ready. There's no announcement yet that the Reds plan to bring Abbott back to the rotation. Overall, like, Spires would then become the Reds' 6th starter. They actually kind of don't have a 7th starter right now. That would be like Chase Petty, who's probably still too young to be called up in terms of his experience level. So Spires still becomes an important depth piece for them, but Abbott's always been a guy they've been more confident in.
Latest on Alexis Diaz is what?
I'm going to do the thing where I'm not going to do a deep sigh. I'm going to say deep sigh because that's my reaction. There it is. Alexis Diaz will be getting at least a few more rehab appearances, Terry Francona said. Francona always, he said, well, he walked 2 guys when we asked him about his rehab on Friday. And Diaz has done a progression to get his mechanics in sync and aligned. And, he did a specific set of workouts and routine and exercises in the bullpen, stuff that I'd never seen before. But clearly it's not at a point yet where Diaz can throw strikes consistently. And not that that's necessarily injury related, but it's all the pieces working together that creates a very, very unique, it's not grammatically correct, that creates a unique type of situation with Alexis Diaz. And the bullpen settled in, but they still need Diaz to be the team and the pitching staff they're going to be. And right now, Diaz just isn't Diaz from a strike throwing perspective, and the rehab assignment now continues.
It just adds so many other variables to the equation in the bullpen if you're not sure that the guy who's been your closer, who's been an all-star closer, is going to be your closer when healthy. And there's been no indication yet. Am I right?
I don't think he'll be he'll be the closer right away when he comes back. I think John's kind of settled in, and Diaz kind of has more to prove.
Yeah, no, I get the same sense, and now the goal is just to have some savable games to kind of move forward with because the Reds haven't been able to find many of those so far this season. We'll talk about what's next on the field for the Reds coming up in just a bit, but right now we promised Tito versus technology, so let's go back to Milwaukee. Your manager is dog sick, unable to manage the game from the dugout. Still want to watch the game, so what happened from there?
Unfortunately, for the Reds weren't lucky enough to be staying at a FanDuel Sports Milwaukee. I don't know what specific outlet that is, hotel. So Francona didn't get the game on his TV. So he thought he had the MLTV stuff set up. He couldn't get that set up. So he takes out his MLB app and he's listening to it on the radio. And he was like, I was shocked. There was like a 10-minute delay. I was listening to Tommy and Jim were right there. And then he looks at the ESPN app and we already made a pitching change. What the heck? And so then what happens is Jim Day then explains to him the fast forward scroller on the MLB app that he could have used to jump ahead. And Francona's like, well, now you tell me. And obviously he doesn't hope to be using this anymore. He plans to be managing the games, but couldn't get the TV to work. The radio's behind. Tommy and Jim seem to be honored that Francona was listening to them. They're like, all right, nice. I put a little weight in.
Was he at least complimentary of T. Thrall and Jay Day?
You know what I think, and so I mean, Francona, spends a lot of time with Tommy and Jim. They do the extra radio show at the end. Like he knows these guys very well. I think Francona made a point to not praise the broadcast, not for good or for bad, but they know each other very well. Francona or Tommy and Jim, or I guess, because Jim was the color guy. Tommy and Jim don't need Francona praising their broadcasting skills because they already know he thinks highly of them. And Francona, I mean, he knows that they know he thinks highly of them. So he felt like they didn't need the compliment, I would assume.
They're probably okay. But, I mean, think about it. That Francona's never going to be in that position. We can laugh about it, that he couldn't find it or he couldn't figure it out. We've been confronted with that certainly plenty of times, but the guy's in the dugout his entire life. He's not asked to dial up a game to watch or listen to. So,
real quick,
that's funny.
Fun fact about Terry Francona. I mean, this is going back to Cleveland, going back to Boston. Francona loves the team's broadcasters, and some of the closest relationships he has in the whole organization are with the team's broadcasters. The Reds knew this and even talked to some broadcasters as they did their due diligence on Terry Francona.
Yeah, I've heard the same, but it's going to be a lot more fun, and he's going to love them, and they're going to love him a lot more if the Reds can continue to plow their way through this and get things figured out. All right, this was the first road trip of the season for the Reds, and Charlie was on the road in Milwaukee, clearly. We've discussed that. And off the top, I said, look, I've never traveled with Charlie. So when I think about things like this, just random questions come to my mind about your travel habits. So let's dig inside the travel diary of young Charlie Goldsmith. So let's start with the easy one. Is packing stressful to you? Are you a light packer? Are you I might need like a contingency packer? Is that you, or how do you pack for a trip?
I'm probably a bit more of an overpacker. This is just a random thing. I like to wear a button-down shirt for the first game of a road series. You look nice as you show up. I knew it was going to be cold, so I had some extra sweaters. So I had my bigger rolling bag as opposed to my smaller rolling bag. I had my button, not that I had to check it, but I have a bigger one and a smaller one. I had my quarter zips and my polo shirts ready to go, and I stayed at a nice DoubleTree that I like because it's right on the main street. It's right next to a diner that I like, and then it's right next to kind of it's called like the 3rd Street Market, where it's got a bunch of pop-up food court type situation. And I'm able to go there for several meals, including a great one where I had a chicken parmesan, I had sweet potato pie, and then I had the cookies and cream novelty popcorn.
That's kind of a Southern thing, sweet potato pie. And 1, you're not from the South, and 2, you're not in the South.
I saw sweet potato pie and I wanted it. You got a problem with that? No.
No, not being from the South. I just don't want you to be a poser and pretend that you like Southern fare. And how have you been exposed to Southern fare in your life? You grew up here in Chicago and in the Northeast, and somehow you found sweet potato pie.
Well, that life is full of surprises.
I guess so. And you got to head. Answer these things one at a time. You got to head. I was going to ask you about
sorry.
go-to spots in Milwaukee, and you just jumped right into it. So I'm going to backtrack and bring you back down to how early do you get to the airport? Are you a time guy where you get tense if you're not there by a certain time, or you just roll in and roll through the line?
I'll get there around 90 minutes early, at least. I get that from my father. I get to the airport very, very early.
All right. You're waiting for your boarding group to be called. Are you seated until your group is called, or do you hover at the gate?
I'll I get there early, so I usually have a pretty good seat near the gate. Now I have a complaint. I was zone 5. Good zone. A lot of people in zone 5.
Yeah.
Is anybody in zone 4? Nobody was in zone 4 on any of my flights. There's always, you have your early boarding, then you got the zone 1 first class. I don't pay attention to zone 2. Zone 3, a lot of people go. Zone 4, crickets. It's like, why do we have a zone that nobody uses? Is my question to our listeners at Delta, or our listeners who work for Delta.
Okay. Maybe you'll get a response on that, but that's one of the questions. There are many questions I have about the boarding process that we won't jump into right here because it gets complicated. If you have a preference, front of the aircraft or rear?
Why would you want to sit in the back of the airplane? To me, easy in, easy out. I don't know that there's any advantage to sitting in the back of the airplane. Now,
Okay.
back of the school bus is the place to be, but
That's kind of where the cool kids hung out in the back, right?
sure. Yeah,
That's what they told me.
theoretically. Yeah,
Okay. Window, aisle, or middle seat?
aisle.
Is there any scenario where you feel it's acceptable to recline your seat with someone seated behind you?
Never. Now, I was on a flight back from the Bengals game against the Chiefs in week 2 of last season, and my seat was broken. And
Mhm.
so, like the filter,
Somebody
but
thinks you're leaning back.
it had no filter. It had no
Right.
stopper. So
Yeah.
every time that I moved, the chair went with me. And the guy behind me gives it to me.
Yeah.
He yells at me. And I'm like, "Sir, the chair's broken." And then he was stunned. And "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." And so that's a true travel story. And this was all at like 6 in the morning.
I like that. Last thing about your flight or any part of your travel experience. Do you have a pet peeve, something a fellow traveler or flyer may do that drives Charlie Goldsmith crazy?
Gotta wear shoes. I feel like that's an obvious one that you'd think more people
with
would
you on that.
follow.
I'm with you on
The thing that drives me crazy is when people. Let's stick to the decorum we have for deplaning. Don't try to be like a running back cutting through the A gap to slice between people as you get off the plane before people 3 rows in front of you are getting off the plane.
Exactly. And since you already hit on some of your go-to Milwaukee spots for food and whatnot, in your travels around baseball, how does Milwaukee and American Family Field rate as a road city for a traveling beat writer?
Actually, much improved this year. The biggest thing I look at is convenience getting to and from the ballpark. I always joke the hardest part of the job is getting an Uber after the game. Milwaukee significantly improved their Uber program this year.
Oh.
So it's now in a different lot, which is actually easier to get to. There's like a holding area for the people with lines of cars that organizes it. So it went from one of the hardest cities to get an Uber to one of the easiest cities to get an Uber. The media dining below average, but not bad. Kind of like at number 4, number 5 starter.
Yep.
Workable, but not anything you're gonna write home about. I like the downtown area. It's fine. It's a fine, solid trip. Not quite as good as Pittsburgh. Chicago's kind of its own things. Like what hotel can you get in is usually the hardest thing there. St. Louis isn't great. That's the division.
And just to be clear, Milwaukee's a lot better in July and August than it is in March and April.
That's right.
Yeah, clearly.
That's right.
Clearly. All right, I love that. We're going to keep doing that. Right now, let's talk about the next travel experience for the Cincinnati Reds, and that is to continue this road trip on the West Coast. And everybody's talking about the National League West, NL West, the Dodgers, the Padres. Look out. Well, the Dodgers have lost twice. The Padres have lost twice, both very, very good teams, and they're sitting at the top of the division, the San Francisco Giants. Their only loss, a 3-2 setback in the second game of the season to the Cincinnati Reds at Great American Ballpark. Do you have a thought about the Reds trying to get right in San Francisco, facing this team for a second time in a short time frame?
Well, it's going to be a challenge. I was really impressed with, especially the depth of that Giants rotation.
Yeah.
Significantly stood out. It's another team that plays smart, clean baseball. Specifically, when you look at the left side of that infield, it's a team that's not going to beat itself. It's another good barometer right now because of the talent and the pitching staff and because of the consistency in the field to say, can the Reds go out and win a game? Because they've been, losing games, obviously, but you know what I'm saying there. They've been finding ways to lose recently. The Giants aren't that type of team, and so the Reds are going to have to go out and earn it to win this series.
Good talk, Chaz. Really good talk. Good tales from the road in Milwaukee. Good travel stories and the behind-the-scenes stuff on this edition of the Cincinnati Reds. There are telling things in each story, and we look forward to sharing more of those stories here on Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith. Our final portion of the show is to encourage, not beg, encourage people to watch
Motivate.
and listen. Motivate. Yeah, I think we motivated them for the last 30 minutes with some of these fine stories you've told.
Well, here you go. Let's go. Let's motivate right here.
All right, let's motivate. You can find it anywhere you find your podcast, Apple, Spotify. It's going to be on YouTube as well. Please leave a favorable rating. Please like and subscribe in whatever options you can. And check out Charlie's chalkboard too, because you'll get stuff like the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day the Reds had in Milwaukee. I'm Brian Giesenslaw. That's Chaz. Chaz, we'll see you next time.
See you.